We have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now.
Everyone, welcome back to our Saturday Canada elections discussion. This is our bonus episode. We didn't have time to put it in our episode that launched on Friday in our general election conversation. So we thought we'd do a quick 15, 20 minutes on Gen Z. And what we want to talk about is what's driving young men to vote Conservative in Canada. This has sort of been something sociologists have been discussing in the US quite heavily, as we saw that in Trump's election. Young men, Gen Z, heavily slid to Trump. And this week, I happened to see, which I will link in the description below, CBC was talking about it, and it was sort of an investigative piece on what this looks like, what their voting trends were. We saw with millennials, sort of back in the day, that even millennial men tended to slide as an overall population group. It varied, obviously Alberta, Saskatchewan is a little bit different if you start breaking it down by region. But overall, millennial men sort of slid liberal. So what is it about the younger generation that is doing this? Mm-hmm. So not surprisingly, the first thing I wanted to talk about is culture. And now I know you're not Gen Z, but you and Rio are a lot younger, and men. Mm-hmm. And so one of the big things specifically in this piece, and we've seen it in the US, there's actually a really good show, if you're interested in this, on the Bulwark. I think it's weekly. I only watch it, I catch it once in a while when I can. But the Bulwark kind of saw this phenomena with young men. And so they actually now have a full hour-length show. It's their regular podcast host, but his co-host is actually a Gen Z male. Mm-hmm. And he's very he's a registered Democrat, so he would be considered more liberal. But they bring on Gen Z young men more. They have had women on, but it's for this particular issue, they've mostly focused on young men. And so they've brought in both people that have voted for Trump and people that didn't, but they were really trying to dig down into two types of Gen Zers. Those that didn't vote at all, and they talked to somebody that actually served in the US military who chooses not to vote, which was quite interesting. And then they also talked to a couple of young men that voted specifically for Trump. So if you guys, maybe I'll link to the Bulwark below also in the description. And if you're interested in really digging into Gen Z and the sociology around that, you guys can go and check out their podcast, because I can't recommend them enough. Full disclosure, they're run by Never Trumpers, so it does kind of heavily lean traditional Republican, but I still think that it's a great podcast to dig into this more. So with that said, you probably wouldn't be at all surprised to learn that there's lots of cultural anxiety. And one of the things that these men tend to talk about is just how we've gone so far left, right? In response to kind of growing up millennials with boomer parents and maybe sort of out there views about same-sex marriage and those types of things, that we've gone all the way left. So that was sort of the first thing. What do you think here? Does this surprise you?
To be honest with you, I'm not surprised at all, because I think right now, a lot of men are struggling right now. You have these different types of progressive movements going on right now in different things. You have Me Too, Black Lives Matters, and things like that. And that's been more radically left.
Yeah.
And
100%, yeah.
And I think men are just a little bit worried now and scared as well. And also
particularly white men too, hey?
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. And they feel that they really want values that focus on family and freedoms a little bit more on that sense. And I think they want them from themselves particularly, right? And I think what they're doing is
economic security, right?
Yeah, and they want that security of a job, because I know a lot of them were saying that I just want a job is what they're saying. And right now, that's what they feel like is valuable to them, because some of them in some of the countries, in some places in the world, they can't get jobs too, right? And so,
Never mind the rest of the world here.
yeah, and let alone in Canada. And so it's a struggle, right? So I think that's what they're really worried about. They want those things, whereas you see the woman tending to go more left is because they want those values that are more liberal based. So I'm not surprised by any means, but at the same time, it's changing the trends of voter votes, right?
Yeah, and I think it's really important. This is a good point. I'll just bring up this number. So 41% of men under 30 tend to back the conservatives, while only 23% of women in that same group back conservatives. And I guess I wonder a little bit between like the economy that we have, it's no secret that the world is sort of shaken, even if part of this is self-inflicted tariff crap. So there's kind of that piece. And then I wonder if, because people like someone to blame, right? So if we look at 1930s, 40s Germany, one of the ways Hitler rose to power was through, and no, this isn't like an everybody's Hitler comparison, people. One of the ways Hitler rose to power was through like people's concern about the economy. And Hitler came out there with the message that like only I can fix it, which we know works. Like Trump's out there saying, like when he campaigned, it was I'm the only one that can fix it. Poilievre is saying the same thing, like I'm the only one that can fix it. So that was like the first thing. And then secondly, people like it when they have someone to blame. So what we're seeing in like right-wing politics right now is conservatives saying like, it's not your fault, it's DEI. So like that woman that has the job, she only has it because of DEI. It's really hard as a sociologist, I know this. If you try to explain to a 20-something, and I've been in this exact situation as a TA'd as a grad student, and if you try to explain to a room full of men in their 20s that like, yeah, you have white privilege, and I get that you can't like get a job and the economy sucks and all that, but like it's not because of your skin color. Like they don't understand that. Like they can't differentiate between like, I didn't get this job because the economy sucks and there's a lot of competition versus I didn't get this job because of all of the same reasons as that guy, but also I'm Black and nobody can pronounce my name, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because that has like come out so much in the last 20 years and we focus so much on it, I think it's been really easy for people like Trump to come out and say it's DEI's fault.
Mm-hmm.
And I this is where I'm gonna get like lambasted again because they're gonna be like, now you hate millennials. But I do truly think that in part, this is sort of the backlash to that like millennial backlash to boomers. Does that make sense? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
Like,
and I think that's a problem too, right?
yeah, 100%.
And I think that's the problem right now. I think there's a lot of things like that that are affecting particularly young men, right? And they're really struggling, you know, because they want steady. They want, they want a bit more, certain types of values, right? And of course, these men are wanting, economic values, and they're not getting it from more the left-leaning parties, right? And women are trying to figure out how to be better, right? And I think it shows that men are struggling right now in general, right? And I know lots of places in other countries, men don't have jobs, right? Like I said before, and that's a problem. They can't support themselves, right? So I think there's a lot of, ideology problems there as well, and cultural problems involved in that too, right? And that's a way that men can feel like when they're not engaged and they're not, represented, they'll flock to the Conservative Party for that.
Right. And actually, funny you say that, because I think there's another key thing here. And I think that is how people get their media. People have moved away from places like what a lot of podcasters call like the legacy media, right? So like CBC, CNN, National Post, whatever, all of those different MSNBC, to more sort of the podcast sphere, whether that be organizations like, say, the Bulwark or Pod Save America, which are run by individuals that like were in governments, right? So they kind of have that like authority, that like people understand and trust them to know and understand what's going on in politics. So they like listen to those shows. But then there's another kind of podcaster that people go to, and the right has been, I think this is the other thing, the right has been really, really smart in getting their messaging out, because the right, if for nothing else, are great communicators. Like if we look at Danielle Smith, that's a person that knows how to get her message out and stick to the message. And the right has done that in the podcast sphere. Like they kind of identified early, like, oh shit, this is where people are going, so this is where we need to be. And this was one of the big, like in the postmortem after the election, a lot of it showed like Kamala Harris probably should have spent time talking to real people on like podcasts and stuff to kind of form her message. And we see a lot of young men also flocking to shows that are talking about this, that don't generally talk about politics. And that I think is super important. So the two big ones that kind of came out when I was researching this segment was Joe Rogan, which should surprise no one. Joe Rogan, who, if you don't know him, just go Google him and you'll understand. But he's basically super popular podcaster and kind of just shoots the shit about everything. Like he doesn't really have one topic that he sticks to. Like he's not like a sports commentator or like a political one. He just sort of talks about things that interest him. Lately, it's sort of been politics. And then Jordan Peterson is another really popular podcaster in the US, who ironically is a Canadian psychologist that moved down to the US. So I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson or not, but he was another one that got pretty popular during the Trump campaign, and had him on quite a bit. And of course, other podcasters then like picked up on this, and it sort of just like rolled the right through the podcast sphere. And I think that sort of like offered men a sort type of like validation, but also community that wasn't just community in politics.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to make too, because I think the fact that men are struggling to even, have that community, and when you have Joe Rogan and you have like Jordan Peterson having like kind of giving them a sense of community, I think that gives them that ability to find people who are more like them and also kind of relate to them. And I think that's what they find, because just in general, just from just basic gender trends, is that men don't have a lot of friends just in general, right? And a lot of connections as they get older. So I think if they can find people who are talking like them, that they can relate to, that can build their sense of community, that's easier for them to flock to, because they don't, like I'm sure as a sociologist yourself, gender sociologists, that stuff talk about how men just generally don't have a lot of friends in general, or a lot of people they hang out with. So I think, and most of the people they hang out with are their spouses or their partner's friends and stuff like that.
We're kind of seeing this. Sorry to interrupt you, but we are kind of seeing this in the younger generations too. So like if we take my niece, for example, like a lot of her time is spent online, and she's sort of, not that she doesn't have any friends, she does have a few friends, but she kind of like is part of a generation that's collapsed in on themselves, and like their friendships kind of take place online. And if you ask her, she'll say like, oh, I really only have one friend, even though like she'll be over at my house for dinner and her Snapchat will be going like crazy, and she'll be like on social media talking to different people, and she'll have people in her class. But because that's like so integrated online and there isn't that like in-person connection, she has this feeling like she has like her boyfriend and maybe like one or two other people, which
Mhm.
I'm sure it kind of reflects millennials, some millennials.
And I'm not surprised by that because
Yeah, whereas like at school, like when I was in high school, I had like a few close friends, but we didn't have the internet. So like we would just hang out in big groups drinking in the national park here and then
and you
get
know,
caught by the
like
cops.
I always go back to when I was in like my younger years, we used to play in our cul-de-sac and we would
Yeah.
play, kick the can. For those who know, kick the can, grounders. We would go to the park. We would ride
Maybe
our
we did
bikes.
have kind of the same childhood.
Things like that. And it's like, like we would have always want to go out to play. People would ring our doorbell at 7 o'clock in the morning wanting to play on a Saturday morning. So like we didn't really have things like iPhones or anything like that to play with. We would go out and play things, and we would go to each other's house and make spaghetti and meatballs and go to the basement and play Barbies for all you
Mario.
know, right? And like so like it's a very different mentality. And like I know a lot of the people I talk to, they always say to me they miss seeing this opportunity to go out and play in the cul-de-sac or playing on the street when they now. So it's a different demographic in terms of friends, because nowadays friends are online, right? A lot of these times, and a lot of people don't actually meet up in person. They spend time chatting on Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram. Like I didn't have any of that stuff, so I didn't have
Yeah.
to worry about that thing. And of course, people are bullying people online too. That makes it a tough situation to
Yeah.
handle.
I could
And
get away from my bullies as soon as I got on the school bus. Or
yeah,
off the school bus,
and that's the thing.
depending.
I could go home and shut the door and nobody would care, because I didn't have to worry about my Facebook blowing up with comments saying that I'm a bad person, right?
Yeah.
So nowadays you can't even get away from it, and people are just so worried about everything now online because it's so easy to spread. And if someone shares a picture of this or that without your permission, you get in big trouble. There's a whole bunch of conversations we can talk about on AI generation and stuff like that, which
Oh,
is a
that's going to be a
privacy thing.
whole new level for whatever the generation. What's the generation behind Gen Z? Whoever they are.
Yeah, it's just scary, right? I didn't have to worry about any of that stuff, right?
Right.
So I'm glad I'm not back then, but
So then I guess that leads me to kind of like the bigger question that I've been struggling with since I started reading about this. And that is like, so is it fair to describe this new flock to conservatism as a backlash to politics? Or is that just dismissive of the legitimate frustrations that the left is just like flat out ignoring instead of trying to like, I don't even want to say educate, but like engage with people instead of, because like one of the things I think that's a huge problem on both the left and the right, but for this conversation, let's like focus on the left's problems. I think we've focused on the right a lot. Is sort of that just like dismissive kind of like, well, if you don't understand, I can't explain it to you. You're just a horrible person. I've watched in my own life, as an example, my father-in-law, I've seen him kind of, I don't want to say evolve, like he wasn't like a good person or anything before, but his beliefs have definitely kind of evolved over time. As somebody who was born in the 50s, he had like, 50s beliefs, right? And so it wasn't until he really started engaging with somebody who was trans that he really started to understand those issues, right? And a lot of the time, I'm sure he got whatever, you're just an old white business boomer that doesn't understand and you're just a terrible person, get away from me. So like I almost wonder if this flocking to conservatism, the left in the politics as a team sport thing, really has no one to blame but themselves. And they're just kind of overlooking these legitimate frustrations of young men.
Yeah, I think it is not just a political realignment, right? I think it has a lot to do with a crisis right now that we're playing out, and it's particularly the identity generational crisis that we're experiencing. I think for these men, right, they're not really just focused on tax cuts and things like that, traditional stuff, but they're focusing on the fact that they're trying to find like their identity a bit, right, in this
Yeah.
type of thing. And I think right now they're struggling to find that. And I think you have to realize that also women and men are living in totally different stuff right now. And they're dealing with so totally different issues. But I think it's just, you know, like look at the online view right now. And I think that's where you have to look. Online systems and ecosystems are very different for each of them.
Mhm.
And men are dealing with different issues that are not always the, you know, like the what women are dealing with. And so I think that's where men are struggling, but it's also women are trying to find their sense too. And they're trying to find a party that aligns with them, which is why they're flocking more left as well on the spectrum.
Right. Which, and I guess that actually is great, because my next sort of like thought around this is worrying about the growing isolation of men and women into these like separate online tribes, let's call them. And then like, what does that mean for like empathy? What does that mean for policy? What does that mean? Let's put that aside for a minute. What does that even mean for dating culture? Like, if we look at America right now, we have seen many stories start to come out and people talking about like about the division within the family over Trump. Things that are so polarized in the US right now. We have literally seen women divorce their husbands because they found out their husbands voted for Trump. And that might seem like drastic or however you want to look at that, but I think that really points to like the different issues that men and women have. And that's clearly not even just like Gen Z men and Gen Z women. These are like people in their late 20s, 30s, even 40s and older that we're seeing this trend happen in the US.
I'm really not surprised by that, because people have like the women and the men are having different points right now, and different issues and different things that they want to align with right now. It's just showing itself. And yes, it's drastic that a woman or a man is divorcing each other over views, but at the same time, it's not uncommon. You see the rate of divorce
50%.
going up 50%. And I have tons of friends right now, not just because they're divorcing because of political issues, just divorcing because of their husband or their spouse going crazy, right? And I don't know whether that has a lot to do with the politics. That might have to do with politics, but at the same time, I think there's certain expectations a lot of times from both men and women that are not being fulfilled and not being aligned. And that probably comes back from, you know, generational identity crisis being playing out there. But also, it's affecting political alignment too, on top of that. So I think there's a lot of issues other than just, you know, like just one thing. I think there's a multiple issues that are really compounding it together.
That's depressing.
And it's sad. It's very sad, but at the same time, it's affecting everyone. Like you see in other places, like in some of the Asian places, some men can't even form spouses because there's not enough women to date as well. So they're struggling to even find people to marry, right? So,
which ironically was because of policy.
Exactly. And that's policy driven, right? And so
policy and sexism, but
yeah, but also they also valued men more than women.
Yeah, that was what I meant by the sexism. And so that's like quite interesting too, because I'm just thinking about like the policy piece here, right? And if we like just think back to, and I hate to keep going back to the like America, because I know we're supposed to more be Canadian, but it's kind of already happened, right? So it's easy to sort of jump over there. But if you look at the Harris campaign, they were running commercials that were like, nobody's going to tell your husband how you voted. So like they had already picked up on this like division of like who's going to vote for Trump and who's going to vote Harris, and then ran commercials about it, which was kind of when I first started like really thinking about this, because I was like, okay, well, obviously there's some research somebody's been reading here about this, right? And so then I can't help but think like, well, this policy is sort of like seeping into everyday lives, because it really wasn't that long ago where like I guess where I struggle is during the Harper era, I was again more like liberal. And then my parents, being like West Calgary, literally voted for Stephen Harper, like he was their MP. And we still got along fine. Like, it was fine. It was just like, I would be like, oh, you're going to vote for a guy that's kicking the media out? Like, we saw kind of like the start of that like far kind of right. I don't even want to say like clinging to authoritarianism, but like that's sort of how far right movements like globally are going, right? And we sort of saw it start back then. But people didn't like have full on like, I'm gonna cut you out of my life. I would just be like, Mom, you're kind of dumb. Like, why would you? This guy doesn't even, right? So like, but now it's just gotten so much more. There's so much more to lose, right? Like, you look at Trump now, and we just spent, an hour where we kept going back to gulags, where he's disappearing people, and now he's talking about disappearing American citizens. So I feel like, could this also just be a product of that kind of coming into play? Whereas, there is that element of people where like they vote for what's best for them. What would be best for my house is for me to vote for Poilievre. But I also have like, I don't need to only consider myself. Like, I'm well off enough that it doesn't matter, right? But say for like my neighbor who just brought over her in-laws, and if you listen to this, I'm very sorry for you. But she has like 8 people in her house. They work from home. They have like, I think 5 kids now living under that roof between like the 2 families, because her, it's like not her, like she has her in-laws like his parents, but also like his siblings living there with their kids. And so like there's household budgets, they're tight. And so like some people like have to vote on like, this is what's best for me. I need the tax cut. I can't afford liberal environmentalism right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a strong concern, and I think that's what a lot of people are worried about, right? Especially in Alberta per se,
Yeah.
right? And I think you have to realize that people are very, very concerned right now with the economy. They're very concerned about Trump, and they feel like that they don't want to pay taxes. Like at the end of the day, who wants to pay taxes anyway, right? And I think these men they want a job, and they want stability in these things, but Mark Carney, yes, might give them stability on certain things, but they're not stability in jobs per se, and they don't want to deal with environment stuff because they can't even work. So,
Right.
and then look at that family you were saying, right? It's a multi-generational household by any means, and that's
Well, and there's also the cultural stuff that comes in from that,
yeah.
right? I can't remember what. I think they're Filipino, but the point is that their kids are first generational Canadians, so they're already like, yes, they're fleeing whatever horrible things are happening in their countries, but they're still like they're very Catholic. Like, I have to be very careful just like passing conversation. I love them, but like I have to be careful in my passing conversation with them, because I don't want to like offend them, right? And they're very conservative, very nice people, but they do have like, between like immigration concerns and economy, and then bringing their family over, even just like what it means to like be in Alberta, as sort of, I guess, to like exemplify this. A couple of years ago, I happened to be talking to her outside. I think it was actually during COVID. We talked a lot because, you could only go out like in your little area. And one day she was just talking to me, and she kind of seemed upset. And it had turned out that her and her husband had had a big argument about whether or not their kids should learn their native language. And she was of the opinion that like, I want my kids to know our language. And he was of the opinion that like, no, we need to integrate into Canada. We live in Alberta. The economy's horrible. It's hard for me to get a job. We need our kids to be Canadian, so that our kids particularly, and the reason I bring this up is because they particularly mentioned their oldest, and their oldest is a boy. And so I kind of just like, even in like this conversation, it just seems so it seemed crazy to me. Like I was it's the white girl. I was just like, dude, no, teach your kids your language. Like, what's his problem? But
Mhm.
if you think about that for even 5 seconds from a sociological perspective, I can completely understand why he would be worried about his son growing up, who now is like 15 years old and kind of a part of this exact demographic, right? That like Gen Z looking at graduating high school in a couple of years, in a world where we don't know what's going to happen because we don't even know if the tariffs we had before we started taping this are the tariffs we have now an hour later.
Yeah, and that's the problem right now with politics in general. It's changing. It's, as you know, and I'm sure as other people know, it's hard to keep up. Like, there's so many things moving around right now with everything, like US, Canada, overseas, China, wherever, right? And it's like tough to keep up with everything. And there's so many issues that are coming to the forefront. And right now, I think like we need to be careful on how things are, right? Just in general. And I think these parties are not making these messages towards younger men, right? Just in general, right? And I think, yes, I don't think they've written them off, but it's just like we need to adapt these messages towards younger men and younger women, right? So, and I think that's the problem. We have to really, really be careful. But at the same time, I think, like you would talk about your niece, and that generation is totally different compared to our generation too, as well. So,
Yeah, right. So I guess because I don't want to like go on too long. We've been talking now about half hour, so like that's a perfect length for a mini episode. But I think my TLDR on this is that for young men, I don't think conservatism even is about like tax cuts or tradition. I think my takeaway is it's about reclaiming a sense of agency in a world that frankly is just feeling chaotic and judgmental and stacked against them. Particularly young white men, and whether or not like that's true and like what my feelings are on that as not a white man.
and I'm not a white man as well, in case
Yeah,
you're
right.
wondering.
Like it doesn't matter because like I think that that's the sense of like that's how they're kind of feeling.
Mhm.
So yeah, I
Like,
think that's kind of where I'm at, right? Because they're trying to like get through, and we're having a really also a transition here to that digital economy as well, right? So I
but
think
we're
that's
also
kind
having
of
a,
where I am.
but we're also having a crisis right now, just in general, with identity
Yeah.
and generational crisis. And I think the one thing we cannot forget is that generational crisis, like your niece, for example, and generational crisis in our demographics as well, we're struggling as well in terms of understanding ourselves. So I think people can't forget that, but we're also witnessing this realignment of things, right? Just
Yeah.
all over the world, right?
Yeah.
And new
And so
world order, right?
yeah, I guess the risk isn't like polarization. It's also just like, how do we talk to each other and try to like be empathetic?
And that is and that's the big thing. And how do we understand each other? It's not only being empathetic, but understand each other and have a discussion whether or not they align or not align with each other. A lot of us can't even have discussions with each other,
Right.
right?
And
So,
I guess that's the bigger question. Is this something that can even be bridged?
uh, like personally, I think it can, but it's going to take a lot of work, and
You
we have to.
hesitated.
And but at the same time, I think social media has to play an integral part to that. But at the same time, social media is not doing that, right? And social media is not fostering that. But at the same time, am I hopeful? Potentially, but is it going to happen tomorrow? No, it's going to take years of things happening, right? And realignment of those things. And I think it's going to take a sort of shift in thinking process and understanding process of each other.
Yeah. I
It's tough.
think. No, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's tough, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. And I think that that is the perfect way to end this mini episode. So if you made it this far, thanks for listening to our bonus episode. It was really fun. Maybe we'll do more of these because I quite enjoyed this sort of like side conversation. The podcast was up on Friday, so if you haven't seen the main podcast, go and check it out. Rio and I did our geopolitics one, which is just Trump. That came out on Tuesday this week, so it's also up, so check that one out. Other than that, we will see you next week for our debate breakdown, our debate analysis, which should be fun times.
That should be a fun day. Have a good night and have a good day, everyone.
See everyone.